Before we get into the episode, a quick reminder that this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment or legal advice. If you are enjoying Onramp media content, please like, subscribe, and share, as it goes a long way in helping others find the signal through the noise. Now for a word from Onramp. Onramp is a Bitcoin asset management platform built on multi-institution custody, leveraging our partnership with BitGo and their 10-plus year track record in securing assets, and CoinCover, the premier digital asset risk mitigation company. Onramp's multi-institution custody is a segregated, institutional-grade vault, requiring 2 of 3 institutions at any point in time to sign once a client's unique permissions have been met. At Onramp, we understand that your Bitcoin journey is a multi-generational pursuit, catalyzed by the ideals of perseverance, aspiration, and legacy. That's why we're proud to introduce Onramp Heritage, a suite of private client services dedicated to ensuring your Bitcoin legacy is preserved and passed on, embodying the true essence of wealth that goes beyond mere numbers. If you would like to learn more, please schedule a consultation.
It all comes down to computers communicating.
The information superhighway can be a confusing mix of on-ramps and off-ramps.
Bitcoin is worthless artificial gold.
Is it still rat poison?
Probably rat poison squared.
We need to get into the world of, okay, this is actually foundational technology.
What the Internet of Money does is it creates a single network which can do a microtransaction to a giga-transaction.
The Internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable ecash.
And we're live. Welcome back to Final Settlement. Very excited for today's conversation. Today on the show, we have Ben Carman and Tony Giorgio from Mutiny Wallet. As mentioned, super excited for this conversation. I think, Final Settlement as a show, we've really tried to help our audience go beyond sort of Bitcoin as purely a store of value asset, digital gold thesis, and really think about Bitcoin as a piece of technology, as an open source protocol that people are building on top of. And I genuinely view these two individuals as sort of the tip of the spear in terms of catalyzing Bitcoin's usage and utility as a medium of exchange, as opposed to just purely a store of value. So very excited to have them on the show. Tony and Ben, welcome.
Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Yeah, what's up, guys? Yeah. Good to see you again.
Very excited to have you guys on, being multiple kind of builders and founders in the space. I think you guys have a very unique lens in what you're building, and a lot of battle wounds or scars. And I think that's healthy as you kind of grow. It's like I picked up on this notion of the first people through the Bitcoin door are probably the people that got shot, and it's people behind them that are going to be the winners or leaders in building the right products. And so it's always bullish when somebody has unique experiences from a different firm or building, and then can go out and branch out to build something net new. So excited for the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. So let's maybe just dive right in. Let's dive right in, and maybe it'd be helpful just a little bit of sort of brief background on what you guys have contributed to the Bitcoin space prior to Mutiny, and then what brought both of you to found Mutiny and focus on Bitcoin wallets and Bitcoin payments.
Yeah, I can start. On my side, I kind of got into Bitcoin in 2017 or so, when I had my first job, in 2016 or so, and started mining with the GPU, my gaming computer. And then just it didn't take too long to go to all the meetups and kind of see what was going on. I think it was hearing about Lightning at a crypto meetup, and then just getting hooked. And going Bitcoin only. Shortly after that, I joined a company called Learning Machine, where we were doing digital credentials on top of Bitcoin. We were working with MIT and Malta and the Bahamas, and a lot of different, certificates or graduation record kind of places. After that, that got acquired by Highland in 2020 or so, literally February 2020. It was wild times. Perfect time for them to get acquired. They timed the market really well. But yeah, shortly after that, went to BottlePay to build out their Lightning infrastructure and Bitcoin infrastructure there. It's an exchange, and it was an exchange in the UK. very similar to a strike-like experience, but for Europe. They ended up getting acquired by NYDIG a few years back. I've done Impervious, building out some of their Lightning infrastructure, and then kind of did some contracting for a little bit, and that kind of just led me to, I was doing contracting for Voltage, kind of building out their new LSP that they were building, and that, there was kind of like a fork in the road where we're like, okay, me and one of our co-founders, Paul, it's me, Paul, and Ben, and we kind of just like, hey, should we build this Mutiny thing? Like, it started out as like a little hackathon project that we kind of we won second place out of like 80 participants, and we were like, hey, do we want to do this? Do we want to go balls deep with this? And brought Ben on along to help with the hackathon, and we all kind of just said, yeah, let's quit our jobs and do this. So we've been a company since April 1st of last year, so it's only been 1 year in, and it's been a wild ride already. But yeah, it's mostly my history. I'll let Ben say his as well.
Yeah, I mean, me and Tony got around around the same time. Like, I got into Bitcoin around like 2017, and bought the top like everyone else, but then bought some shit coins and then found the Bitcoin only life. It took me about like a year, and I got a job at SuredBits. Basically, we're working on like a Bitcoin Scala library and doing a lot of research on DLCs and stuff there. And then after that, I kind of like, was just like drudgery of like research and like, open source work, and wanted to go and like try to like, make a product for users. So me and Ben Price did the Bitcoin company, and I was there for about a year and a half, basically just doing like selling gift cards for Bitcoin over Lightning. And that basically got me the other side of where like, oh, getting all these users, like, actually like, competing with the market, this is fun. But then in the inverse, it was like, all day I was spending my time just like integrating like fiat payments, and I hated my life. So I feel like Mutiny is kind of the unison of both these companies, where I had to do like, the fun open source hard Bitcoin stuff while also like trying to get users and like, solve real world problems. So we've just been, grinding for the last year on this now, and starting to hit some real headway. So it's been a lot of fun.
I didn't even think about that aspect, but there is something very powerful about not having to deal with the fiat world. Like, I know, Tony, you brought up this idea, notion of, non-custodial is very beneficial from a regulatory perspective. And, the idea of not having unilateral control and being able to affect control. But then the other idea of not having to touch dollars is important, right? From a just pure like game theory and self-preservation perspective, you can provide tools that are independent of any system, and just it's very empowering. And I didn't think about like you guys have kind of like structured that way with the web wallet, or the app obviously exists within Apple's framework, but doesn't have to be if you don't need it.
Yeah, we both had experience touching fiat from our last jobs. I also had to do I did all integrations at BottlePay, so Bitcoin, Lightning, and all the fiat rails, SEPA, and their other one that they have over there in Europe. And that was, the Bitcoin part took a month. The Lightning part took a month, and then it took like a year, probably 6 months to a year to really flesh out all the edge cases in the fiat system. And I know Ben probably has the same experience dealing with like Visa cards and all of that. So yeah, it's just so much simpler building on Bitcoin. And so it's like kind of a Bitcoin developer's dream. And honestly, from a company perspective, like we don't have to do all the MSB paperwork. We don't have to get MTLs. We don't have to do any of those things. Like you said, our primary focus is being more focused on the, non-custodial or even federated, and we can get into fedimints too in a little bit. But just this whole idea, like you said, where we don't have unilateral control, we're shipping software. Everything, all the keys and all that, Bitcoin payments, all of that happens on the user's device. So like that's very important from both regulatory and also from a privacy perspective for the user as well.
Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful. Sorry, it might be helpful to just take a bit of a step back and talk a bit about sort of the state of Lightning today. Both of you have worked intimately with Lightning over the past several years, and I'm curious if you could just describe sort of at a high level what some of the limitations of Lightning are, and why that has effectively driven much of Lightning usage to be custodial, and why really what the second order of that is your vision for Mutiny and focusing on self-custody and non-custodial solutions, why that's important to sort of the long-term trajectory of Bitcoin one, and then also just, from a user perspective, why that might be a more optimal solution than just trusting a few centralized providers.
Yeah, Ben, you can take that. You've been talking and writing about limitations for a while.
Yeah, I mean, and there's like two limitations. One is just like straight up like the UX of, if I want to tell my mom like what a lightning channel is and what HTLCs are and like all these words, she's just like, no thanks, and won't use it. So like that just first upfront like, knowledge cost of like figuring out like liquidity and stuff makes Lightning really hard for a lot of people. And a lot of apps like Phoenix, and we've tried to do this in Mutiny as well, is like kind of abstract away all of that channel management stuff. But the problem is when you do that, you kind of like the fees become a little high because you're just like opening channels on chain and doing this stuff. And this comes into kind of the other limitation is like Lightning doesn't scale to 8 billion users self-custodial, at least. Like there's only so much room on the blockchain to create channels, and then when fees get to a certain level, channels need to be like a certain size to make it like economically feasible. Like I think like today this transaction like fee rates in the mempool are like 300 sats per vbyte. It's like, okay, so like any channel under like $1,000 might not be really viable for at least opening today. Maybe fees will go down, and you just hopefully had your channels open already, but like having that like variable cost makes it really hard to like economically calculate when to do it. And if we expect Bitcoin to go to 8 billion users in the future, pricing to be $100 million, well, on-chain fees are not going to be $3. Like they're going to be a lot higher. So we're not going to have everyone onboarding into on-chain and then thus Lightning, because that just doesn't scale. So that's why we're seeing that's why we kind of see like a lot of custodial solutions take off. It's because they can extract away all that hard channel management stuff, and then all this fee stuff that we're talking about of like scaling it and stuff is like kind of just gone, because you just have one Lightning node that serves 10,000 users, 100,000 users, and so now instead of having one on-chain transaction per user, it's 100,000th of a per user, so it's way cheaper, and then you can use to amortize that across transaction fees and stuff. So it makes it a lot easier to do, but it does break down Bitcoin's whole thesis of like self-custodial, privacy, all this stuff. But thankfully things like ecash is kind of breaking this model where we can have like a lot of those privacy stuff still valid in custodial solutions, and you can kind of make the trust assumptions better with like fedimints.
I think one important thing that's important to me, Ben, and Paul, and a lot of Bitcoiners too, is that Bitcoin is used as a currency. Like I have no doubt, like Bitcoin is a great medium of store of value. The digital gold, perhaps that's why we all stay in, right? But I think it's important to us that we keep the original vision of Bitcoin as being used as a currency. And if it's not being used as a currency, then its usefulness is just to collect and then sit there and then never touch it and never use it. I think there's a lot of important pillars in Bitcoin usage across the industry. I have Bitcoin that's like locked up in multi-sig. I have Bitcoin that's like on a single hardware wallet. I have Bitcoin that's on my Mutiny wallet and across all the wallets that I test. And so like there's definitely a purpose for your net worth, right? And a portion of that should be used for currency, as a currency, and for payments itself. And as we talk about custodians, one of the things that we're trying to get away from over the last decade or two really is just this idea that PayPal and Venmo and Cash App, they can shut down your account at will, and some people are using them for just transactions or paying their merchant or paying a tattoo artist or a haircut, salon person, like all these things that we're using payments for on the daily basis. Like people are using those accounts, and then those are getting shut down with almost no support or customer support that you get. It's like no questions asked. It's just like, okay, something went internally wrong with that account. We flagged it, and then now you're all of a sudden banned, even though there's nothing even illegal about what you're doing. It's just these policies and regulations and all the things that financial institutions kind of like have started adopting and pushing for. So it's one of those things that if we're going back and we're using Bitcoin again as payments, but we're only going through custodians, we're only going through, and I'm not throwing any shade at any particular ones. I love Strike, but if we're only using Strike, which is just a Venmo on top of Bitcoin, then they can shut down anyone's account at will and take their funds and stop the payments from even going through at all. So I want to just get back to the world of like, okay, can we build something that can mimic these apps like Venmo, PayPal, Strike, River, but on the Bitcoin side for digital payments, because the digital payments, market is very high. And if it is just going through like, okay, you have to sign up and you have to KYC yourself and upload a 3D image of your face and your ID in order to participate in Bitcoin, like then that we've lost the plot along the way. I think it's important that we can go to these financial institutions to swap, digital dollars or something, or a digital fiat in any way for Bitcoin, but we still need to be able to participate in this Bitcoin, currency market without being stopped or censored.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you guys touched on are important there. I think like this whole notion, it needs to be said out loud about whether it's self-custody or lightning channels, just the idea that it does not scale to the amount of people if everybody's going to participate in the future state of global economy, settling back to Bitcoin, and then recognizing if that's to be true, then not bitching about it, but then figuring out, well, how do you actually get it done within the design space that exists? And you actually hit the nail on the head, Tony, and something like we talk about a little bit. You called out Strike, but just in the sense of like, I think it's just a proxy for, because we've been so early, that the existing firms for the past 15 years look exactly like the old, whether it's Wall Street or traditional finance firms. Like you took Bitcoin and then just like you have a stock or bond and you just custody at Coinbase, or you create a brokerage just like you buy a stock or anything, and then you just like park it at Strike. And it's like a 2D version of a world where this asset is 3D. And so this is how I think about like multi-institution, this dynamic of like no single entity holds it, or similar to what you guys are talking about, whether it's through Mutiny and not having to do all this, or the ecash dynamic. It's like almost even lightning channels are a derivative of like a payment rail, like a Visa or MasterCard, and you can get shut off. But then when you throw in ecash, that kind of like throws it for a loop and now starts to use the asset in a 3D way. And I think this like next 15 years, we're going to just see more and more of this. For the first 15 years, we're just like the extensions of the old fiat world, and it got us to where we're at. But now as we need to scale and build trustless or trust minimized versions, this is like, you can start to squint and see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I mean, there is a lot to be said where take existing business. I mean, I think we all kind of agree, like take existing businesses that exist in the fiat world and let's, make the Bitcoin version of that. And there's a lot of value in that. But like you said, like we don't have to limit ourselves to just those kind of institutions, and we can kind of, grow bigger ones that like aren't confined to the same constraints just because of those facts. And yeah, like you said, like ecash can kind of like play in this kind of realm where, it could do both things. You can have this ecash bearer asset basically, and you can do lightning payments with it. You can do on-chain payments with it. You kind of, the way we're kind of thinking about it with fedimints, we have this federated ecash where not a single custodian takes control of it. You have it distributed across multiple key holders. And so not a single key holder can stop your transactions or get in the way of it. It's like a majority, it's like a majority multi-sig. And so you can kind of do these things where it's like, you have gateways that are attached to these federations, and you can do payments across different currency types like Lightning. If there's another Bitcoin layer 2, and, we can talk about as well, like alternatives to Lightning. But, if there's another layer 2 like Arc, or, I feel like there's like a new layer 2 on Bitcoin popping up every day. Like whatever one comes on board, you can have an ecash token that represents, if you have one sat of an ecash token, you can have one sat of Bitcoin, right? And you can send it across any layer that you want, just kind of going through these service providers that their whole functionality is just to swap ecash for whatever native currency, whatever digital currency you're trying to transact with. So, from like a layer perspective, Fedimint and Lightning too kind of are the glue to the financial transactions on top of Bitcoin that you can partake in.
And maybe just drilling down a bit more on that, like, can you elaborate on what Fedimint and different ecash solutions solve for in terms of those limitations that we were referring to with Lightning earlier? So whether it's the channel liquidity or offline receives. Like, what can these other interoperable protocols offer when you're sort of combining them, as you mentioned? What can they offer in terms of solving for some of those hurdles that exist today?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's less that self custody is hard. Now there's a certain threshold, right? Like if you're trying to secure a ton of money versus you're trying to secure a little bit amount of money, you can get into different degrees. But the degree we're talking about here is like, we're trying to create a Bitcoin spending wallet. And so we're talking about like whatever you carry around in your cash. Maybe it's a few $100 worth of Bitcoin at a time that you're walking around with, quote unquote. So it's not that custody is hard. It's not that writing down 12 words and keeping them mostly secure. Maybe you're just writing them down on a piece of paper. It doesn't make sense to get a steel plate, and etch 12 words on it. If you're just talking about like a few $100, like that steel plate might be worth more than that. So it's not that self-custody at this scale is hard or difficult, that people can't, or people aren't capable of comprehending to write down 12 words. It's mostly about, opening up payment channels to end users. It's the liquidity involved in that from both an operation perspective and the user perspective. There's, when you open up a payment channel with a user, there's all of these hurdles that get in the way. It's like, okay, well, that payment channel has to close at a certain point, right? To be able to, so both parties can get their funds on chain eventually. And so there's like channel reserves that get in the way. If channel fees spike up really high, like they have been, we had some users with Lightning channels that like the fees would have eaten the entire capacity of the channel, so they couldn't send or receive, because if they did so, the potential to incur an on-chain transaction from the result of a forced closure would have taken up the entirety of the channel. They would have had no money left if they closed the channel at those fee rates. So, when you talk about like, if you open up a channel in low fee environments and all of a sudden it spikes up really high, now you can't use your channel, and it's like, what's the point? And then also the onboarding perspective. If to use Lightning, you have to invest at least $50 to $100 worth of Bitcoin to open a channel to yourself, for the LSP to open a channel to you, you're talking about like making users pay $50 to $100 to use your app before they even know what it is or how to use it or anything like that. Like the cost of user acquisition is really high from the user's perspective. And when you're competing with apps like Venmo or Strike or Cash App or some of these other payment apps where they, kind of say like, hey, get $5 free to start up. We're not a multi-billion-dollar institution. We can't give out $5 willy-nilly, for one. But for two, it's the opposite. You need to have $50 to $100 of Bitcoin to even get started with this wallet. And so like, when we're talking about things that like Fedimint can kind of solve, is where you have some liquidity provider do the swaps between, in and out of Lightning and the federation you choose, and you just hold ecash in the end. When you get enough ecash and you have enough Bitcoin to open a channel, you can do that. But until then, it's not reasonable to open a channel to you. So then you can't use the app. So Fedimint kind of solves that for us, where you can get started with like a single sat in Mutiny Wallet right now by adding a federation, and it creates a Lightning invoice in the end. So it's not this. I know there's a lot of distinction between like Fedimint and Lightning and Liquid and all of these, but what comes together in the end is it all goes over Lightning. And so the fact that I can show my Mutiny wallet with the federation added, I can show that invoice to, someone that's using Aqua, which is using Liquid to do a similar, federation thing behind the scenes. They're both interoperable because they go through Lightning, and it's just like this, on the Fedimint side, it's just this ecash layer that does it. On the Liquid side, they have another federation. It doesn't use ecash, it uses like a Bitcoin-based blockchain to do it, but it's the same concept. It's like using alternative layers to do these swaps, because it's just unfeasible to do these swaps or small transactions on top of Bitcoin today.
Yeah, I think something important to highlight is like, before Fedimint, like the kind of default flow people would do was something like Wallet Satoshi, where it's just like fully custodial wallet, and like there is no like ecash. It's just like a database that these people that we don't know are running, and like it worked. It's almost the exact same experience as like a federation, but the problem is it's a single signer that can rug pull everyone, and there's absolutely no privacy. And Fedimint is basically like the exact same experience, but perfect privacy, as well as it's a federation, so you have like, you know, a 3 or 4 multi-sig instead of a single person that can rug pull you. So it makes that trust trade-off like a million times better, and you know, it kind of solves that, like, you know, it goes back to the Bitcoin ethos of like, we're doing this wallet Satoshi, but the right way kind of thing, instead of like, you know, just getting it to work. Now we're doing it with strong principles that, you know, we can actually like confidently launch without, you know, like risking users to launch. As well, it makes it like regulatory way easier. Like, Wallet Satoshi shut down in America, and it's like, you know, federations won't be shut down in America because they're not custodial. You know, a single user or a single guardian in the federation doesn't have custody of funds the same way like Liquid has been running for 6 years. They're not being targeted by the government because, you know, they don't have custody of the funds. If you go after a single person, they can't steal the money. So it makes it like that much easier.
Yeah, I think this is all like really important landscape. You know, our audience, not to generalize, but I think is on the not on the most technical side. And so like explaining the existing landscape with like custodial offerings, how you reference, you know, the wallet Satoshi had a user experience, but then it leaves you with this thing that it works until it doesn't. Similarly with like a single custodian holding your assets, it's good until it's FTX and you don't know what the next FTX or BlockFi. And so what you guys like using the design space, I think super savvy. I know you guys talked a little bit about it with Matt about like looking at, well, what worked in the existing world, like PayPal's famous for the 10-10 model. And you guys had the opposite problem. It's like, I want people to use this and we got to get virality, but they need to pay us to start. That's like fucking crazy. So then how do we actually do this? And it's like this idea of counter positioning. It's like, you guys are startups. So what do you do in your startup? You have to use the leverage you have. And it's like thinking about innovation, and ecash is a great example. If it's interoperable, it's not something that like somebody that's been backed with a lot of money is going to go do because they just aren't incentivized to do it. But it's actually a better experience across the board. And you can let people start to play in this economy, and then they can start to figure out, you know, learn more. And there's probably digital native apps that will be coming in different ways that technology will start to adopt ecash. That will just like further kind of Mutiny's like, you know, adoption in itself. And so I just thought it was very like elegant of the way that anybody, like you said, one sat to whatever they want to come in, and they can leave as quickly as they can come in. And then you don't have to deal from a company perspective of all that like regulatory burden of like having to give the user experience in a seamless way, but also have to manage like, you know, millions of dollars for MTLs and compliance and all those things if you're going to manage all those channels.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting there you brought up is the idea that, you know, the existing players aren't going to switch their entire infrastructure to do something like, you know, federated ecash. And I think that's interesting because, I mean, you're exactly right. Like, if someone existing has already got their MTLs, you know, I'm just going to say general exchange. An exchange would greatly benefit from switching to something like federated ecash, especially if it's a Bitcoin only exchange anyways. And, you know, there's a few out there. But they've already got their MTLs. They've already got, you know, they're already operating as a money service business. They're already doing all the compliance thing. They have a whole compliance team. They have everything already there. I mean, they would still benefit from the users would still benefit from the privacy gains if they switch to something like federated ecash, and their users would still benefit. I mean, I think that's the biggest one. This is the privacy gains for the users. And then, yeah, no account login tracking or anything like that. It's just like the seed words that the user controls that that secures the ecash behind that federation. So they're not going to switch their entire infrastructure to go to something like federated ecash just so the user has better privacy. You know, when you ask general users, I mean, we started out very, very privacy focused, and that's still ingrained into our ideals and our tech. But when you ask people if they care about privacy, they'll say yes, but 9 times out of 10, like, they don't care. So from that perspective, it's like no one's gonna change their whole infrastructure to switch to federated ecash just to provide something to the user that the users aren't asking for. So that's another model where it's like, you know, we can kind of come in and as a brand new startup with just a dev team of 3 and no money for MTLs or any of those regulations, because we don't have to anyways. And then also on top of that, you know, there's with the Fedimint movement, you know, Fedi has done a great job of spearing up a lot of adoption for Fedimint across the world. You know, their whole pitch is like, you know, this is federated custody for communities. So they're going boots on the ground, trying to get fedimint adoption, trying to get more fedimints spun up. That benefits us as well. So, we're not even operating in this area where like, oh, okay, it's technically legally, non-custodial because one of the members is not considered a custodian. It's like, we're not running the mint at all. So, we're in this operation, we're in this perspective that we can interoperate with this open, quasi-custodial federated ecash, open source software without even having to touch it at all. We just interface it with it directly. It's like if Wallet Satoshi had built up their exchange to be like, a specific API, and they got every other custodian to implement the same APIs. It's the same way to interface with it. It's the same thing with the fedimint. It's like, it's this way to do federated custody. It's got the same APIs. Anyone can plug and play a wallet into any federation that exists without having to do additional work. So one of the things that we've sort of done, one of the problems when we launched some of the fedimint integrations is people were asking us like, hey, where do I find a federation? Can you put one in the app so we can find out how to find a federation, how to join a federation, things like that. We built something along with a few players in the whole Nostra ecosystem to discover federations and to kind of have this web of trust model of, if I join a federation and I like it, I can recommend it. And people that, follow me on Nostra or follow me in Mutiny Wallet, it's kind of this open source social media software. If they follow me in that way and they see which mint I recommend, which mint I use, they might be able to discover that mint and use it and trust it as well. So it's just kind of like a way to signal, like, almost like a rating system for banks. Like, I use this, it's good, and kind of have, the open market kind of figure out, which banks are good, basically.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating point that, we've talked with Max Webster in the past around these sort of webs of trust or market ranking types of systems. I think it's a super interesting and unique way to actually get better outcomes for users and individuals that are, whether it's deciding which federation to use or which LSP to use, like having actual, market forces be able to ascribe value to, better options out there, I think is a super fascinating way that these open protocols actually unlock as a possibility. And one thing I want to just go back to was around, the idea of fedimints. When I first heard about fedimints, I guess almost 2 years, a little over 2 years ago now, it really it excited me in the sense that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, in some sense, fedimints present the opportunity to better scale Bitcoin without potential soft forks, at least in the interim. And I'm curious, your thoughts around effectively, do you view fedimints and things like ecash as sort of ways to get better scalability, reach those billions of people using Lightning, sort of in the absence of soft forks? Or do you think, ultimately some amount of soft forks will be necessary for the usability of Lightning to really flourish? Just sort of trying to determine, like, what can we build with what exists today versus, where are the stopgaps in terms of like actual soft forks that might be necessary in the future?
And I wouldn't say that fedimints are scaling Bitcoin the same way like Coinbase doesn't scale Bitcoin because you can send transactions internally. Like, at the end of the day, it's like an alternate kind of thing that, you're no longer using Bitcoin, you're using ecash now.
Right.
But I do agree that the general idea is the same though, of like, without, like we were saying earlier, Lightning does not scale to 8 billion users. So, okay, then what do we do to get Bitcoin and everyone on Bitcoin? Like right now, yeah, if we got 0 soft forks ever, it's basically like fedimints is kind of the idealized way to get people using, the closest approximation to Bitcoin of, technically there could be inflation inside of a fedimint, but the incentives are best modeled where it won't likely happen. And if it does, that fedimint will end up like, just getting bank run and shutting down because of that, at least somewhere way like FTX did. Versus like if we didn't do fediments, we did something like, a bunch of Coinbases. Well, now, those Coinbases are going to turn into FTXs and, blow up. So I think fedimints are like, if we get absolutely no soft forks, fedimints are probably the ideal way to like, get the most like Bitcoin like payments happening in the world. But even if we did get like every soft fork we'd ever want under the sun to like enable all the scaling, it still might not even like actually end up scaling Bitcoin to 8 billion users. Like, Bitcoin is hyper optimized for verifiability and like, slow moving transactions that, happen at defined intervals so we can actually predict the system. And being able to like scale that to 8 billion users is like kind of like an impossible dream. And maybe we can get it closer and closer. Instead of having only 1 million users to be self-sovereign, we could have 100 million. Like that's a lot better, but that's still not 8 billion. So getting that, I think in my opinion, I would like to see soft forks so we could raise that barrier and get more and more people able to like end up being those like self-sovereign people. But getting all 8 billion people on Earth to be self-sovereign, I think is probably an unachievable goal on Bitcoin. But Fedimints is like lets you get to that closest approximation where like we're not going to hit this idealized every single person has their multi-sig on chain. Like that's just never going to happen. So if we're not doing that, Fedimints are probably the best alternative where we can have people with extremely private payments that are in this federated custody, so it's hard to rug pull, hard to inflate, all this stuff. And without that, then it'd be a lot harder.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in exploring any of these topics further or want to learn more about how we can help you secure a new or existing Bitcoin allocation, get in touch with our team at onrampbitcoin.com. We look forward to supporting you on your Bitcoin journey.
I think it's also worth just calling out, and I'll be the guy, like, we can debate or just like it's worth throwing out. I think the framing and this whole idea, we talk about it on the last trade with Marty about like Fed speak when people talk about inflation and all these fucked up like terms that just aren't true. Is I feel like that's how almost like talking about self-sovereignty for 8 billion people and everybody needs to hold their keys, I think is absolute bullshit and just not like based in reality, because it's ultimately a bearish take on like society in general. That means that we can't trust anybody, which historically that doesn't make any sense if we're going to like flourish and grow. And so everybody that comes into the space generally, doesn't sit and look at these problems for very long. So they take it at face value and they're like, oh, this doesn't look like what I thought Bitcoin was going to scale or look like, versus just like looking at this notion of trust minimized. And you have the version that's the base layer of 12 seed words, and you can always take delivery, and then you build on top of that and you hold people accountable. And if they fuck up, then you basically don't trust them and they rug themselves. And so we grow a version of the world in that way. And like, it's just like when you're building and you're actually in the arena, you're like, oh yeah, this is actually how it has to work, because if I don't, I get to like take the ball. I go home with no money and shame because I was an idiot and didn't realize that I had to look past like ideologies, and you just have to build what the market will take. So anyway, I just think it's important because I think most people thinking like everybody has to hold their own keys and self-custody. It's just like, it doesn't make sense from like even coordination of economic activity. If everybody's gonna have to go in a cave to go figure out how to spend their money, I don't think it's been well thought through.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we've internalized at Onramp and spoken a lot about in terms of, you do want to live in a world where you can still trust institutions. And, there's some interesting sort of analogs and similarities between what Fedimint provides and what we're doing with multi-institution custody, in the sense that the user isn't holding any keys, but those keys are distributed to various holders who don't have unilateral control. And that becomes the key element that allows you to minimize trust to the greatest extent possible, and makes it an order of magnitude greater than just trusting a single counterparty. And so there's some interesting similarities there in terms of what can be built with Fedimint. And I think, that's something that we're going to be thinking critically about going forward is, this is sort of mapping to the institutional landscape of, okay, you still want to be able to trust institutions, but you don't want to give them enough power to rug you. You want to give them enough power where they actually have to prove themselves and their worth over time. And if they don't uphold that level of trust, then they're out of the quorum effectively.
Well,
Yeah,
and
I think
it's worth
there.
I was going to just add one thing because I'm curious to get your guys' take, because I know you have stuff to add on this. Is like, I think the even term institution, right, from like the Bitcoin lens is like, this like fucked up conglomerate, right? It's just made up of people and incentives. And it's like something that I haven't had a chance to talk with Justin about on the Fedi side is I'm curious how they're thinking, and you guys are thinking about like scale of mints to the point where I think it was you talking about it, Tony, about like putting like a termination or whatever the term is of like, so then you can consistently move to another one. It's like that doesn't seem like the most scalable or like user friendly approach versus imagine if the holders are people that are held accountable by the proxy of their business. They have a window that you can call. Like it's not all anonymous. It's basically entities that have to be held accountable. And if they don't, their business goes under. So the game theory requires them to facilitate doing what they said they were going to do. And then by proxy of that, you get larger amounts of capital, larger amounts of revenue because it just feels like a natural thing. And it's why I've been very captivated on what you guys and fedimints coming because it feels like there's just going to be this natural intersection between like trust of entities holding keys coupled with this scalable layer that is bound to like intersect or like integrate at a certain point.
The cool thing is that it almost feels like, I know Unchained was like, they were really early, years ago, pushing multi-sig, especially, in the institutional perspective. And, we're almost kind of getting to that middle ground where we're seeing this experimentation between alternative forms of multi-sig. I think there's going to be some federations that operate anonymously. I think there's going to be federations that operate, just for their local community. I think there's going to be federations for digital community as well, where you just know someone based on their reputation online. And then there's the multi-institution based federations, and Onramp fits in there as well, where you kind of see, I 100% agree. Like you don't want to have to trust a single federation, a single custodian. But if you get into this, especially if it's a single institution custodian, right? Like, you get into the whole FTX scenario. But imagine if it was something like, Coinbase is basically custodying every ETF that exists, right? That's a big problem. I'm surprised every single ETF holder is okay with that. But you can get into a scenario where it's like, oh, well, it's the top 10, biggest companies in the United States. Like they're, competing with each other on one hand. But on another hand, they're just, they're also providing the reputation to provide a service for their users, right? Like imagine if Starbucks and Coca-Cola started a federation together with a bunch of other companies. Like, Starbucks is doing it to the benefit of their customers and their consumers. But they also don't want that liability, and they don't want that negative perception that they could just completely rug all their users, right? Like they have other institutions keeping them accountable, just like they are to the other institutions. So it kind of, it's almost like, a tug of war in a way where, okay, we can't do anything because we're all at a stalemate here, but we all win-win. It's almost a win-win scenario for the institutions that could be in competition to each other to some degree, and then also the consumers that now don't have to trust a single entity. They get to, it'd be a complete suicide mission if like the top 10 companies in the United States all decided, okay, we're gonna rug all of our users all at the same time. Like that would be like a disaster story of a lifetime. I mean, it could happen. Anything can happen in this world, but it's just like you're not going to see billions and billions of dollars, trillions even, just thrown away in the blink of an eye, just for like a short monetary gain. So yeah, it's interesting to see. I do think there's going to be the multiple layers that we get to now experiment with. I'm even excited for like the anonymous and like digital community one where, you can kind of keep them small, you can kind of keep them close knit. They shouldn't grow to be like huge ones, right? But if it's just something that like, oh, hey, like, me and my family can join a federation and I can keep it to just that, and it would still be better than, putting them all on one Satoshi today.
I do want to push it back against Tanguma's original point. Like, I think like Fedimint, like we have to settle for Fedimint. Like if we could feasibly scale self-custodial to the entire world, like, get rid of all the UX hurdles and do it, that's the ideal solution. Like ideally we remove all forms of trust because, like we're having this communication right now over the internet using encrypted, like our browsers encrypting all this communication. Like we don't do that because we like don't think it's a good idea. It's just like, okay, that's just a default because it's better to do that, because why trust our ISP with our internet traffic? Why trust all this data when it's, easily to just encrypt it and not have to deal with that? If we could just, have self-custodial everywhere, don't need to trust institutions, that's a better world. It's just we don't live in that world because there's, physical limits of what we can do. And, that's why we have to do fedimints. I think if we could actually scale it, it would be a lot better, but, we sadly can't.
Yeah, but that's not true because we could do that with gold. And we didn't do that with gold. We parked it in institutions because we had to coordinate from an economic perspective.
Well, you can't scale gold like self-custodially, like at least like, sending gold across the world is like, extremely costly. I can't give you like $5 worth of gold. Like that's why we use silver. Like
But I mean, for like capital formation, like for buildings to be built and to go to Mars and like for projects and capital markets to form, like that's natural for like a civilization to grow. So like you have to have central firms. It's just like, it's the idea of trust minimized, where the thesis, at least on our end, is it looks more like this whole notion. I think you guys are stumbling on this. It's like the world actually, or at least I won't put this in, you tell me if I'm right directionally, is everybody thought we were going to recreate the wheel in Bitcoin, and I'm convinced we're repurposing it. And so it looks more like the old world with the trust minimized function, i.e. like if you look at the ETFs, you called it out, like one of our first things was like the Onramp Bitcoin Trust, 3 different institutions hold the key, you can take delivery of the Bitcoin, right? Like you're need capping Bitcoin's properties if you can't actually take it. So it's built into the fabric, but it kind of looks similarly like to GBTC. It's just a better product from like somebody that would want that security-like exposure, and then they get caught up on why you want the underlying and be able to take delivery. I'm convinced that's what large pools of capital long-term, and a key sits in the UAE and Singapore and all these geopolitical things like farm out, but it doesn't take away the fact that like people for the next 10 plus years are going to want large pools of Bitcoin, like set endowments, institutions. And so similarly, like with a big bank or financial intermediary that has to like move around large scale capital and build, the fucking roads or whatever from a large scale citadel, like they're going to need somebody to facilitate that and lock it in and lend it out and do all of these things. And so you have to be able to manifest that. It's like, it doesn't exist in somebody going in back to their self-custodial wallet, sending it. Like it just doesn't equate. So I think that's like the angle where I don't think it scales. Like even if it did scale, it wouldn't make sense in my mind for everybody to hold it.
Yeah, I mean, you'd still have like companies and stuff, but it's like ideally like, this company has their own self-custodial stack versus like this company, it's not big enough, so it's using like a federation or something. Like I guess that's more what I'm getting at.
Yeah. The federation that Tony brought up, and this is where I was in I fell off, and I'm curious where it went, Tony or Ben, to pick up. I don't know if Brian, you heard it, where you reference merchants. I thought it was like fascinating. I hadn't been able to think through how it would be, but I know it like just like instinctually makes complete sense for a merchant to be able to launch or leverage ecash to take goods and services from a privacy perspective. And it's literally like, the idea is like you couldn't tell anybody. You wouldn't even know if they were accepting it because you would just send some goods and then you would get paid. And then you could swap out for whatever, into Lightning or into, BTC. But it just makes too much sense, except obviously what we know with interchange too. And I'm curious how far you guys have thought through that, or if you got on that pod with Matt on like, why would somebody adopt something like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and just good timing too. Like just today we launched our integration with Zapright. So, starting today, you could Zapright, it's like a merchant solution, invoicing solution for merchants, basically, mostly targeting for like online, digital sales or, contracting or things like that. So essentially, Mutiny can be the recipient of someone's Zapright invoice terminal. So you go, you pay the invoice, you see how much it costs, you select, okay, I'm going to pay over Lightning, and the user pays for the service, and it will go straight into the Mutiny Wallet of the recipient, of the merchant itself. So it's kind of cool to see because there's a few solutions that exist out there today for users, for merchants itself. There's the open node approach where like they're basically the custodian. I know Lightspark's trying to get into that realm as well. They are operating basically as the Wall Satoshi for merchants. It's pretty much the exact same model, and they'll charge their 1% fee. It starts to turn into something that's almost exactly like the Visa network. It's just Bitcoin, right? And so like we can do so much better than that. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have, like BTC Pay server, where it's like, okay, you run your own node and you manage your own channels, and you're telling merchants to do the exact same thing that like general Bitcoiners like don't want to do in the first place: manage channels and liquidity and like requesting inbound and all of those things. And merchants have bigger, they have liquidity constraints way more than the average Bitcoiner does today on Lightning. An average Bitcoiner that's using Lightning, maybe they have a Raspberry Pi at home or something. They're opening some channels with their Bitcoin stack, and they have some inbound, outbound. They make a few payments a month, and then that's it. But for a merchant, like they need to be receiving payments all day, every day. They can't have a payment failure happen. If you're ever at a grocery store, like when was the last time you had a payment failure? If it happens once a year, that I'm embarrassed. Like what did I do wrong? Like am I broke? Like what's going on? Like it's a very embarrassing situation to be in for both the merchant and the person paying, because you don't know where the problem is. And in the Bitcoin world, you don't know if it's the person sending or the person receiving, if they have enough inbound. All of that to say, like now we're starting to get this middle ground where we can have federations power merchant payments, and they don't have to worry about the inbound, outbound. And at the end of the day, at any point in the day, they can swap that ecash for, they can do an on-chain withdrawal. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of Fedimint. It's like you have the ecash. It's basically a single balance, and if you decide to send it over Lightning or you decide to send it on-chain, it's your choice. So if you're talking about a merchant that's receiving a lot of payments on Lightning because maybe they're $5 or $10, but at the end of the day, you have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin now, you're not going to want to just send that back through Lightning to your bank account, right? Like you're probably going to have payment problems sending that large amount over Lightning. But you can just like take all that money that you received via Lightning on ecash and then do a on-chain deposit to your wallet or to your cold storage at the end of the day, and then you're done. So like it's kind of cool. I mean, and then there's a privacy perspective as well. But at the end of the day, like the merchant can not have to worry about any of the inbound, outbound channel stuff. And now with this integration with Zapright, you can use Mutiny Wallet, and all of that gets converted. All of that, the inbound that happens on the merchant side with this integration, that goes into the federation. So like again, they don't have to sit there and manage channels in the Mutiny Wallet and like do these swap ins, swap outs all the time. It's just like whenever they feel like it, they open Mutiny Wallet, they make one payment out to their cold storage, and then they're done. So this kind of scenario where merchants can start using Fedimints as well. Like I think it'll be huge for that adoption. We can kind of get that middle ground between something like OpenNode and LightSpark and BTC Pay server.
That's really slick. And just to confirm, so two things are happening there. Like somebody could be a merchant, small mom and pop, and set up like a Mutiny Wallet first to open up with a large enough balance. And then they could set up Zapright, and Lightning could go directly into that channel that's been opened by you guys on Mutiny or the self-custodial wallet.
So this bypasses, I mean, you can even bypass. So Mutiny, I don't know if we talked too much about it, but we've sort of built this hybrid approach where at the beginning we had non-custodial channels, and that was it, and on-chain payments. But so you had to have a channel open to use Mutiny Wallet at all. Over the last few months, we've like done a deeper integration with Fedimint. So now we can get that scenario where a user can open up Mutiny Wallet for the first time at a federation and start receiving and sending without having an open channel at all. So in this merchant scenario, they open up Mutiny Wallet, they they sign up for a Lightning address, and then they link that into Zapright. All they have to do is like paste what their Lightning address name is, and then all of a sudden they can start receiving payments through Zapright's invoice screen, and that goes into the Mutiny Wallet, and then they don't have to open a channel at all. But one of the cool things is like after, let's say that they've gone a week or a month and they've accrued a lot of payments into their Mutiny Wallet, if it's like a million sats or something, they can open up a channel right there in the app, and then take custody of that whenever they're ready. So it kind of like flips the narrative a little bit, where taking this hybrid approach is like, hey, if you're just starting out with a wallet and like you don't want to do anything, you don't even know if you're going to stick around, add the federation. And once you get enough sats, like take custody into the same app. It's the same user experience. You can send and receive. It looks exactly the same, whether it's a Federation or it's a Lightning channel. It's just like we try to move the user towards the Lightning channel after they, accrued enough sats. But if they never accrued enough sats, then it was never made sense to open a Lightning channel in the first place.
Yeah, that's super fascinating because it that sort of arrangement just drastically reduces the barrier to entry to using all of this, right? Like you don't need that initial balance in order to participate in this, and then if it is useful for you, you naturally accrue enough balance to ultimately settle that. So I think that's a super elegant approach. One thing I maybe just switching gears slightly, I think we're in a very, in my mind at least, a very interesting spot currently in terms of sort of the Bitcoin development zeitgeist, if you will. And I'm curious to get both of your thoughts on just generally, I think we've seen, as you mentioned, Tony, like, a new L2 being launched every day. Is it really an L2? Is it an L3? What is it really? I'm curious to get your thoughts on all of the different sort of scaling proposals being put forth today. And then sort of secondary to that, we mentioned, potential soft forks, like thinking through the different covenant proposals. What in your mind, is realistic over the next, call it 3 to 5 years, in terms of potential soft forks being implemented? And then also just sort of comment on what we've seen over the past, call it 12 to 18 months, of what seems like to me more people getting involved in terms of thinking through different potential solutions. But then that also raises like the sort of interesting dynamic of people's incentives in terms of, whether it's fudding Lightning because that enables them to get support for what they're building, or things along those lines. I think it's, in one sense, it's very good that there's been a bit of a Cambrian explosion in terms of Bitcoin development, but at the same time, you have to question sort of everyone's incentives. And maybe that's just the paranoid Bitcoiner in me, but curious your thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first one was like all the L2s, like basically all of them aren't really L2s, they're just multi-sigs. And it's like if you're doing an L2 that's a multi-sig, like just use Fedimint, you get all the nice privacy properties and interoperability with Lightning on chain. Like it's basically like, Fedimint is almost like a platform for building L2s, or like, fake L2s, I guess is probably the better word there. But yeah. Yeah, I think like, going to the future with softworks and stuff, like timelines are weird because like, we activated Taproot in like 2021 and like LND released like recently like Taproot Lightning channels, and it's like the simple version of them, not like the all-seeing eye version that we wanted eventually, of like all the nice things like PTLCs and stuff. So like, we could activate every cool softwork tomorrow and like it could still be like 10 years until we actually get like the benefits, at least on Lightning. I do think like there are, Lightning isn't the end all be all. Like Arc is one of the proposals that's been working on a lot lately. They're currently building it like with no soft forks, but if they do get a couple soft forks, it's like a pretty small code change for them, and it makes the system a lot better. So, and since it's like not a Lightning is like multi-million-dollar network with like lots of active participants, so upgrading it is incurs a lot of capital costs and mental costs and all this stuff, versus like if you're starting a whole new network, you could just throw out the old code and ship the new version, because you don't need to worry about backwards compatibility and shipping costs because there are no users yet. So I do think like if we're activating like new softworks, it's probably going to end up helping things like Arc and other competing L2s of Lightning first, just because they don't exist yet, so they can ship a lot faster. But I do think like it would be nice to get some things like CTV or TX hash. I mean, even opcat would be great, so we can just like have all this new functionality and to try at least experiment and have like a real competitor to Lightning that's not just a multi-sig. But is that we have to go through the soft fork process, which everyone seems to hate, so that makes it a lot harder.
I think the interesting
I think that
thoughts
makes a lot of sense.
Alternative.
And you guys have mentioned various sort of things that you're working on integrating into the Mutiny app. I'm curious, what's on sort of the roadmap? I know you have started to dabble in the world of Nostr and integrating that into sort of those market ranking systems that we mentioned earlier. But curious, what's on the roadmap? What are you excited about in terms of building out the functionality of Mutiny Wallet?
We've gotten things into a really great place right now. So as you kind of mentioned, we integrated a lot of Nostr integrations. We have the Fedimint integrations as well. We're getting to the point right now where we can really shill the wallet as much as we can and kind of demonstrate like what would a open source, Venmo style payments application look like. So right now we're just focused on that, and just like we released that just only like a few months ago, and so it's really just like cleaning up a few things post release, and listening to users and implementing the feedback based on our new designs. We like redesigned the whole home screen app to kind of make it mimic a sort of Venmo like experience where you can add new friends in Mutiny Wallet. You can pay them directly without asking for invoices. Like we're kind of moving towards this direction of like a social, like a human centric Bitcoin wallet where it focuses on like paying humans and not focusing on like settling invoices and requesting invoices. So we're kind of focused on, doubling down on that vision. But really, we're kind of in that place now of like, seeing what's working, listening to the user feedback and iterating on that. So we're kind of in a good place where we're flexible with like not having a roadmap, just because we really want to focus on like, okay, like, is this the niche we're like doubling down on? Is this working? Is it something else we need to be doing instead? And so far the traction this month has been great, and so we're kind of just like going to be iterating on this for now. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm missing any obvious roadmap items that we've had, but for now my focus is just like, okay, listen to the users and implement what they're asking for, basically.
Yeah, I mean, like our like next of things is like, clean up, and like we want to like add like push notifications and stuff like that. But it's like, those are all like easy wins. Like large scale features, it's like we're just like really nailing down like, okay, like what we have is solid. Let's like, just emphasize what figure out what the users are like really finding enjoying, and then like even going deeper on that, or like finding things that we can aid there as well. Like, earlier we were talking about the merchant stuff. It's like maybe we can build a POS system if like the Zapra integration is taking off a lot and stuff like that. So, we're just like kind of like, we kind of like had this roadmap from when we launched of like, one day we'll have Lightning, Fedimint, Lightning address, and it'll be beautiful. And we hit that like basically like 2 weeks ago. So now we're like, oh shit, what do we do now? So we're kind of figuring that out, and just nailing down the hatches and making sure everything like continues working with all the stuff we built in the last year.
I think it's a really awesome approach in the sense of like having the bookends of what you want to achieve, but then generally it's almost like I don't know if paradoxical is the right word, but it's like it's not generally like thought of having enough design space to leave open to like what the market pulls forward, versus like most people like have a very stringent, like we got to do it this way. And then you like miss everything else that's happening around. And it feels like leading on the ecash side. And then the merchant stuff is super fascinating, not only from like payments, but this whole notion of like being able to have a form of money from a rewards perspective that is not tied to like sats in the way that Lightning is, and how you can do is just like something that hasn't been seen on like user adoption, client acquisition from whether it's media, whether it's publishers, whether it's like a D2C company, right? Like how do you like incentivize people where you like the wallet can participate, or they can get these like tokens and then they can learn about Bitcoin, and then it's a flywheel for everybody. Is a fascinating concept when you take out having to like deal with channels and Lightning and all of that. And so I think it's just like the very early innings, but as the price appreciates, more and more talent and like entrepreneurs are going to start learning about this, and then they're going to be like talking to you guys on like how to actually get this in their like core product to increase kind of like their user acquisition.
Yeah, we've talked to a few Bitcoin rewards companies already about Fedimint, and like, hey, this is basically like you can reskin it to look like a rewards points like system that you can provide to the users of your app that's interoperable, or you can go to specific merchants and say like, hey, this is your specific rewards points for your users, and you can kind of build a rewards platform just like you said on that. So yeah, I mean the whole merchants design space is huge, and I mean there's a lot of value to be had by focusing on that. So like, one of our perspectives before diving into that is like, okay, let's, we're focusing on like consumer, payers of, consumer payments itself. But then at a certain point that turns into like, okay, now we can solve like the business problems as well. And then meet in the middle, have a great experience for payers, have a great experience for recipients, and be that both ends of the spectrum there. So that could very well be what we end up working on next. But yeah, like Ben said, like we're going to figure that out. See if Zapright merchants, end up using Mutiny Wallet and see what we can fix there. If there's any pain points we can solve on both sides. It's kind of great because now we don't have to build a whole invoicing system, right? We can kind of focus on the recipient payment side and see, if Zapright can solve their problems, and then we can kind of fit in. I mean, that's the cool thing about this ecosystem in general. There is so many different companies working on different parts of the world, essentially, right? And so like, where do we fit in the best? Where can we solve other Bitcoin businesses' pain points, other general businesses' pain points, merchants' pain points, user pain points? Where do we fit in best? And I think, before starting Mutiny Wallet, we were like, yeah, we're going to make a wallet, and it's going to be a great wallet. And that, we know what makes a great Lightning wallet. We know the features of Lightning. We know how to build in general. And now we're kind of the point where, what they don't teach you is like how to just build in general, how to figure out what the market wants, how to move in the right directions, how to do these proof of concepts with, large gains. So like, we're kind of in that, not pivot per se, we're not pivoting in any way, but it's sort of like, how do we next evolve our application? And, for all of us being first time founders and being 1 year in, with like a good traction, a good proof of concept, like the next elevation is sort of what we're diving into, from the Mutiny perspective.
Yeah, I think Tony was highlighting a cool point earlier of like, like we're working on Zapright, and it's kind of like, they actually did like zero work to integrate us. They had already done the work with another provider. We're just using the same protocol as everyone else. So like, we're kind of getting all this like free value from the ecosystem of just like everything's a protocol. So we just naturally get free integrations. Like CoinKite, they have this service called Unleash.chat. It's like ChatGPT, but it's like they like uncuck the models and do it over Nostr. And like Mutiny has DMs in it, so like we have a not AI chat inside of Mutiny for free just on accident, and like stuff like that. Just like we get all these like free integrations from the ecosystem, so you can like kind of find these different protocols, how to layer them together to make like a perfect app. Versus like the fiat system, it's like everyone has a proprietary API. You need to email 13 guys to get access to the API, and it breaks every week, and it's not open source, so when it's broken, you have no idea why, and it's terrible. But here we can just have this Cambrian explosion of different stuff.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing. Open networks, interoperability, and basically being able to iterate on things and share each other's growth effectively. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate about what you guys have built and are building. And Michael sort of alluded to this around just being very intentional about user feedback and building the best experience for people that want to send and receive value. Like, very simply, like if we're successful, like people shouldn't even need to know that necessarily Bitcoin is being used on the back end. Like if they're using ecash tokens and they're sending and receiving ecash tokens, like with zero friction and zero sign up, like that should be the goal of basically incepting Bitcoin adoption into society without even people really knowing it. And I also sort of see that with things like zaps on Nostr or on upvotes on Stacker News. It's like, it's just a better experience, right? Like you actually get value for the value that you create. Like it's just a very organic, natural thing that if you create a better user experience, that is what should create that flywheel of adoption. And it's interesting that or I think it's commendable that you're really focused on just creating the best user experience, and that's how Bitcoin's going to win ultimately. Is like it's a better money one, obviously because of the store of value properties, but it's also a better money because it's easy to use and you might not even know you're using it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking back on where we started with Lightning payments and like hearing everyone's we had some good traction early on, even with the self-custodial. Like it's interesting. The Nostr people, they're very early adopters into this like new social media that exists. Very cypherpunk values. So we got a lot of like early adopter type users from all ends of the spectrum. People that like don't know Bitcoin very well to people that like are very experienced and know everything about how to operate in Bitcoin and Lightning and open channels. So, just even listening to those users as, listening to all of their feedback that they provided, it's like, this is just how Lightning works. Like, there's absolutely no way we can get around that unless we're like not building on Lightning. And so that's kind of like evolved into like, hey, you know what? Fedimint fixes this user's problem, all of these user problems that are having, issues. So that's just been the natural progression of like, okay, cool. We just, with one big integration that we finally completed, we're like, cool, we've like checkboxed all these user issues that we've had that we can't physically solve on Lightning alone. And so it's been beautiful to be able to get to that point where we're like, okay, cool. Now what are all the lowest hanging fruits? It's like, almost like throw away all those issues now. Those are complete. What's next?
With you guys being so close to Nostr, Lightning, the ecash stuff, and then also just, naturally being engineers, like what's the most exciting stuff you guys are seeing right now, whether it's like Nostr related or just like in the Bitcoin ecosystem that has you kind of like interested? Because we look at the boring shit. We just talk to like, people a lot of money and help them understand Bitcoin, and just like, you just like park the Bitcoin and don't touch it, and number goes up, go up works. But, curious on like you guys being at the very edges, what's the interesting stuff that you think probably this next like epoch's going to be? Because you think about 4 years ago, a lot of the stuff we're talking about would just be insane to be talking about. And so anything you guys are seeing that is super like compelling?
I think something that I hope blows up in this cycle is like, we kind of mentioned earlier of like Fedimint can be this platform for other L2s or like, quote unquote L2s. And like basically like Fedimint is not really like Bitcoin is like almost a side project inside of Fedimint where it's really just this federated consensus system. And then there happens to be a Bitcoin module that, lets you spend and receive Bitcoin. But you can make kind of any system inside of there. So I'm really excited to see, some different modules that people make that could like really blow up and show like the really cool use cases that you can do inside of there. And the thing is too, it's like you always have this Bitcoin module in there. So any cool thing that someone builds will have like Bitcoin native payments for free, like instantly inside of it. So I think some really cool things could happen. I mean, for example, something we talked about was like doing like, gambling inside of a Fedimint where you could have like a contract that is validated by the Guardians. So like you could say like, if I'm betting on the Super Bowl, oh, the Chiefs won, and the Guardians all see the Chiefs won, so then the money goes to me. You could build like a, DraftKings, but it can't be shut down by the government. There's no KYC, there's nothing like that, and it's that much better. But and that's just like one example we had. I'm sure this you get release it on 10,000 developers, some like absolutely crazy stuff can happen as well.
Ben's been trying to put gambling on the blockchain since I met him in his shared bits days and DLCs, and so that does not surprise me that creating a cheap Super Bowl over a Fedimint is the natural most exciting thing for Epoch 5.
You gotta get them degens. It's great.
We tried that even on Nostr. We tried to do like a DLC based system on top of Nostr where there's no monetary gain at all. We just use the same cryptography that creates Nostr notes. To just say like, hey, I won or he won, and like the Oracle would come in and prove which one won. But that was DLCs, man. Those, it gets all the hype, but like it is incredibly difficult to work with. We have one of the top minds in the DLC space, and it's just like still too difficult. And that's another thing where it's like, oh, but we can do it in the Fedimint, and you have the same like federated trust minimized model. It's like let's just do it that way.
Yeah, I think where this is like so compelling personally is this whole idea of ecash is like, it's a positive sum game in the sense of like, it's a bank, right? And a bank used to be where everybody net benefited until they started rugging everyone, right? And they fucked up the money. And because of that, like positive sum games mean that the person that's parking their capital or leveraging it, or the bank, and in this case, the fediment is also making money. These are providing a good and service. You can actually see how this actually scales and works and has the game theory behind it. Because again, whether it's in a Fediment 305 or whatever, the way it like manifests from game theory and keeping everybody honest, it's a better version of what exists, and you can actually squint and see how it looks like what it historically has existed, but you put better like governance around it. Because that's how I think about multi-sig. It's just effectively governance at the protocol level when you put institutions or people with faces across or non-faces, which is a different conversation we'll have a theory on. Is like, I'm convinced there's going to be, it looks more like the old world than the anon world from a commercial perspective, because most people don't not want to trust a person they don't know as much as we want as like, Matt or Dell, and people will want to believe that it's going to be the anons that run this stuff. It's like the reality is commercial and consumer behavior really likes to know who the fuck's messing with their money, because they know who to go and show up to the house or call them or email them. And that's a hard pill to swallow, because we historically have looked at this space and wanted to not, be that. And I recognize I can be wrong there, but I think directionally, just by playing this space, and similar to what you guys say, is you're just taking like the market kind of like sends these signals, and they just want to be able to trust people at the end of the day, because that's like how we, you want to wake up and know that an anon isn't going to rug you. So anyway, I think that's like what's super compelling is it's a positive sum game in all of this, and everybody gets to like win and benefit.
Yeah. One of the interesting things with Fediment and just like cashew mints in general is the idea that, there are going to be like competing mints as well. And so you really get into like some old time bank era dynamics where, you have other banks that are trying to collapse a bank that they suspect is running a fractional reserve, and they come in with like huge deposits, and then later come in with huge withdrawals, like banks basically creating bank runs on top of other banks. And just the fact that like Bitcoin and Lightning and all these like mints can move so fast, and like information can move instantaneously across the entire world, you kind of get into the scenario where like if there's any hints of fuckery going on at all, like we can find out instantly. And you have other banks keeping accountable other banks in this way, because like if they go down, like if there's a suspected run on the bank and they're not going to be fully collateralized, all it takes is like one user to finally go, oh, I just tried to do a withdrawal and it wasn't going through. What the hell is going on? And you can have another bank basically enact that to happen. And if they're fully reserved, then boom, there's no problem. Everyone does withdrawals out of the Fediment, out of the mint. And there's no issues. And guess what? We just proved, okay, that mint was fully reserved. We can go back and trust it again. So I don't know. It's just like there's a lot of game theory that can like kind of happen now that would have been much more difficult to do, hundreds of years ago with banks itself. I mean, now we just live in a world where there's no fractional, where there's just no reserve at all, and it's all 0% reserved, every single bank across America, and there's no fuckery going around, because like if one pin drops, everyone falls, and no one wants to live it. It's almost like a nuke scenario for banks. So there's not much of that going on anymore. But yeah, it's just an interesting era to kind of live through. Like how would we redo banks if we could? And Fediment kind of.
We'll have to pick this up. I know we're running up on time, but you literally just hit the nail on the head where we think multi-institution plays out long term. Because if you think about it, BitGo's a roughly $10 billion business, in the sense of like, if they don't sign, their whole business starts to look a lot weirder, in the sense of like everybody's leveraging it. And so that game theory starts to play out as you have larger institutions participating in that. And so if they do not keep their contractual engagement, then you still aren't rugged. You just move the assets and they just rug their whole business. And that's how you can actually start to build trust from a larger scale perspective.
Yeah, it effectively brings better game theory dynamics to accountability, full stop, right? Like in order to gain and maintain trust, you got to go prove it, right? Like whether it's providing a signature or just not wrecking your users, like you have to actually earn that credibility in the market. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I know Michael, I think, has to run, but really want to thank both Ben and Tony for joining today. It was an awesome conversation, and we'll have to do it again, because there's more on the bone here, but great conversation.
Yeah, you guys crushed it.
Thank you both.
Appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks anytime, guys.
All right.
Love it.
Take care, boys.